Well, I hope everyone is doing okay. I'm going to take a second and talk about Charlie Kirk and talk about. I want to try to answer some of these questions that I have seen, but first let's start here. Actually, the tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. And I noticed that a lot of people are asking this question. They are wondering why. Whether you agree with him or not, Charlie Kirk is dead purely because some people didn't like what he had to say. That should outrage every single one of us. And Charlie is more committed to peaceful, open dialogue with those who he disagreed with than anyone I know. God bless him. God blessed him with immense gifts, and he used them boldly and without fear. Peaceful and open dialogue, and yet some people are wondering why the response to someone who's just talking, to someone who is engaging in peaceful and open dialogue. Why would you do such a thing? Why would the response be so violent? And if you have been paying attention to history, and if you know your Socrates, if you've read Plato's works, you know that this battle has been going on for quite some time. This is a cosmic struggle, a cosmic battle, and Charlie is part of that legacy, I believe, and that's what is for me helps me make sense of not just why someone might do this, but even who, the type of person who would do this. So I want to talk a bit about Socrates, and so I'm going to ask you to kind of bear with me as we make the strange connections here. I think you're going to see it right off the bat. The battle between philosophy and sophistry, which would be deception masquerading as philosophy, often in the theater in ancient times, has been going on throughout history. And if you're familiar with Socrates, as I said, or even Jesus, how Jesus died, you will know why Charlie Kirk was killed, and even the type of person, not the person, but the type of person. And it's going to sound a little crazy, but you will read that the charges against Socrates, the ancient philosopher, forefather of Western society, whatever you want, Socrates was ultimately put on trial for two things: impiety, which meant that he did not believe in the gods of the state. I want you to mark that. He did not believe in the gods of the state. And corrupting the youth of Athens. And then tell me that doesn't sound very familiar. It doesn't sound like something that Charlie Kirk was doing. He did not recognize the gods of the state, whatever you want to call that today, the sort of woke mind virus that has been going on. That's what it's called today. But again, this is an ancient battle. So he doesn't recognize those gods. He pushes against the gods of the state. He does present the gospel of Jesus Christ in contrast to that. But the other thing that he did is he went to college campuses, and this is a line that, at least for Athens at the time, they could not tolerate, that Socrates had a way of speaking to the youth. And we'll get to why. We'll unpack why this is. But if you're going to corrupt people, if you're going to get them to believe things that are illogical, if you're going to get them to accept cognitive dissonance about themselves, you really have to start young. You have to coach them from a young age, because we're not illogical by nature. And I would say Charlie Kirk was very much in the realm of philosophy, very much in the realm of a Socrates or even a Jesus, or clearly a Jesus follower. And I'll leave links to some of this, but the playwright Aristophanes is influential in getting Socrates convicted. Okay, so the gods of the state in Athens were often portrayed to the masses, that's very important, in the theater. How do you get people to accept the guise, the lie, the deception about these false gods? Well, you have to use a tool that can reach the masses. Now, the philosopher is at a disadvantage here. He really has to talk to people one-on-one or in small groups. But the theater was a place for mass sort of psychosis, mass adoption of ideas, because it was done through comedy, it was done through drama and shock and awe. And there's a part of this that is not purely evil. I mean, comedy, you can read throughout the Gospels. There is lots of comedy. There is lots of tragedy, clearly. It is ultimately an epic story. And so the theater was a way to, I think, grab a hold of something that God has wired us for, which is story and imagination. They feed our soul, and yet this is a tool that you can actually convert the masses to your ideas. And so the gods of the state were often portrayed in the theater. And so you have Aristophanes, who essentially becomes the enemy of Socrates. And because Socrates was showing that they were being deceptive, that the gods weren't really real, that there was a guise, a ruse going on. And of course, Aristophanes, he makes money when people go to his plays. And so he can't have this. He can't have a Socrates going around popping the bubble and removing the mask. So he puts him on trial. Essentially, he was put on trial by the state, but Aristophanes was influential. And again, not only connecting the impiety, not believing in the gods of the state, corrupting the youth. But listen to this. What happens is actually Aristophanes mocks Socrates first. He writes a play called the Clouds, where he satires Socrates. I'm jumping ahead here. He satirizes Socrates. And then Socrates is put on trial and ultimately convicted. And so Socrates is given a choice between banishment and drinking the hemlock, and Socrates ultimately chooses to drink the hemlock because all true philosophers, all of these people that I would say Charlie Kirk seems to be in this group would give their lives for what they believe in. And so to be banished outside of Athens and death essentially for Socrates were the same thing, because he couldn't do dialogue, he couldn't do philosophy anymore, and he's committed to philosophy. He loves philosophy. He loves wisdom. Okay, so the Clouds comes and mocks Socrates before his trial, and ultimately before his death. Now, again, hang in there with me, but is it not true that South Park just mocked Charlie Kirk? I'm not blaming them. I'm not saying that they led to this, but it is a strange coincidence. It is like history is repeating itself. He's mocked, and actually Charlie embraces this. He sort of says, yeah, this is kind of funny.
Okay, everybody, the South Park episode just dropped, and honestly, it is hilarious. I mean, part of it is kind of like whatever, typical humor, but it was hilarious.
And so you make ridiculous your enemy before you put them on trial, and which leads to their death. I want to connect the play The Frogs, which is about Dionysus, later to a clip from Candice Owens. But Aristophanes also writes The Frogs, which is a comedy about Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, and the theater, Bacchus, is a central character, and this theme of the facade. Dionysus is a god who comes and takes on sort of human form. He's sort of either a mockery of Jesus, or somehow God providentially there's a preparatio evangelica going on, where it seems like God prepared the Hellenistic world to receive the gospel. And even though a play like The Frogs would ultimately try to mock the God, Yahweh, not intentionally, I don't think, but God ironically uses that mockery as fuel to spread the gospel, which is, I think, really interesting. But I just wanted to connect Aristophanes to Dionysus. Aristophanes is the one who essentially leads to the conviction of Socrates. Okay, so Aristophanes' play, The Clouds, directly contributed to Socrates' conviction, but he indirectly addressed the impact of, this is Plato, addressed the impact of Aristophanes' portrayal. In Plato's Apology, which depicts Socrates' defense speech during his trial, 399 BCE, Socrates references the old accusers who have prejudiced the jury against him over time. He mentions a certain comic poet, which is understood to be Aristophanes, who in the clouds portrayed him as a sophist, who speculates about the heavens and denies the gods and teaches rhetoric for money. And so these plays shape public impression. And ultimately, Socrates, in his Apology, says, this trial is already done. I've already lost in the court of public opinion, because as a philosopher, I would have to talk to each and every one of you individually, and we could reason and we could dialogue together, and that's just not the system that he's in. So ultimately, Socrates is convicted. He drinks the hemlock and dies for the cause that he believed in. So again, a strange connection there between Aristophanes mocking Socrates and even Charlie Kirk being mocked, but, they call him the master debater in the South Park episode. And again, ironically, put Charlie Kirk firmly in the camp of the philosophers like Socrates. So why is it a deadly game? Who's doing this? Look at where they put their attention and the fruit of that attention. Philosophers, they love wisdom, they love the truth, they come alive in the arena of dialogue and of words, and I think this would be Charlie. Sophists, who deal with deception and guise, and and so the theater becomes a key tool for them. That if they cannot control the message, they cry out that the message has become violence. And for the sake of self-preservation, I won't mention who I'm thinking of here, but you can see it there on the screen if you're... Notice Candice Owens' observation here that the theater kids are in control. So I want to play a quick clip from Candace.
Lines are crossed. You can look this up. I have been tracing this through the centuries and realizing this cult never really went out of fashion. Lines are crossed. There's pedophilia. There's incest. It's all encouraged in these nights of revelry. And you should also know that theater is a component of this cult. Dionysus is the Greek god of theater. That is actually where Western theater stems from. So when we look across the world and we see all these people in positions of power, and we learn that Justin Trudeau was a drama instructor, Zelensky was an actor, Emmanuel Macron was an actor being instructed by Brigitte, it of course makes you ask yourself the reasonable question, did this cult really survive through the ages? And it did. I told you, I traced it.
And again, I will leave links to all of this in the description of the video. If you're hanging in there still, thank you for being here. And, again, with it, I want to do theology bravely. I want to do dialogue bravely. And so if this interests you, and if you feel like it would be, we're trying to promote good in the world, do what you can to help the algorithm, help me reach more people, and I appreciate you for that. I do think, you hear sort of Candace going through the ages, and again, this is just our modern society has looked into the rearview mirror at history and said, we have nothing to learn from this. We're advanced, society is advanced. We've moved on from the gods and this and that, and that's silliness. But I think that is part of the deception. I think that if you can get people to believe that they evolved from beasts, then you can treat them like beasts. And if they behave beastly, then we have that as a justification for it. But if you were created in the image of God, then you have a responsibility, and ultimately the responsibility is to reflect that image. And so there is this, again, it's a cosmic battle. It's a fight of light and darkness. It is a battle to the death. And there is a religious zealotry around this. And I think what you'll see is that the same spirit exists in these different cults, these different groups throughout the ages, and they need deception in guise. And ultimately, Jesus says this: if you come from your father, the devil, he's the father of lies, right? And so that's his native tongue. Lies and deception are his native tongue. But again, the younger you can be conditioned to buy into these lies, the better, because we're not illogical by nature. And so one of the big issues today is an issue of disconnect between my body and my mental projection of who I am, or my emotional feelings of who I am. And that's one of the things that, Charlie was outspoken about. The greatest threat, though, is someone who will use words to point out the mask and the deception. One well thought out, articulate argument, and the house of cards will fall. And that's the danger that these sophists understand. That's what Aristophanes understood. That is the danger, is they deal in lies and deception. So anybody that exposes the truth, it can pop that bubble. And that's largely what Charlie Kirk did. And for this cult, we'll just go ahead and start calling it a cult. The line that was crossed is that he not only did this, but he did it for the youth. And they would believe the youth belonged to them, and that is sad. And so for someone to coach and train and get young people to think logically and to not buy into the guise was a line too far. Now, it's interesting. I noticed Paul Vanderklay pointed something out. Shout out to Mostly Not Working for the, it's good to see you back. And I'm sorry for the light, I got this window coming in through me, so bear with me again. Modernity is over, and the mask of the not religious is no longer viable. So people are understanding that this is a cosmic battle. This is a religious, spiritual warfare that is going on. And even, Tim Pool and the folks over at Timcast and others, Joe Rogan, as we've highlighted on this podcast, are understanding that the lie was there are no gods. The lie was there are no spirits. The lie was you don't have to believe in ghost stories, but the truth is you're in a ghost story. You are in a story, and there are cosmic forces about, and if you're not aware of them, I think C.S. Lewis touched on this in That Hideous Strength. If you don't realize that there are spirits, if you have been deceived by the cult, then you don't know what you're playing with. And so these quote unquote scientists who create a man without a chest, right? This head, who then gets possessed by a spirit. It's just gruesome, and yet prophetic, and yet sort of prophetic. So Charlie, and I want to move on to something else, right? So the power of the theater, that, as I've said, is that it can communicate to the masses. The disadvantage maybe that the philosopher has is you have to do something one-on-one. You have to do dialogue one-on-one. That's the power of the dialogos. And of course, I should point out, not many people will remember who Aristophanes is, but a lot of people will know who Socrates is. So you can see the power of the dialogue there. And you can see that the guise wears off, the theater guise. But Charlie also did something that even Socrates would have marveled at. Socrates knew that he could not reason with the mob, the crowd. He could not reason with the crowd. The theater was the place for the masses. So they had the advantage. The playwrights, Aristophanes had the advantage there. But the philosopher is most powerful when he's in dialogue with one or two people. Charlie Kirk, however, was experimenting with something and even succeeding with dialogue in mass. And that is where we are today. You can look at, shout out to Luke at the Person Pod, Paul Vanderklay again, the TLC folks. Jordan Hall maybe even touches on this, like the scale of dialogue now is at the scale of the theater. So that advantage that the theater kids, and I was a theater kid, so I say that with affection, the advantage that the theater had over the philosopher is now kind of gone because we are essentially doing dialogue in mass now. Joe Rogan, as I've pointed out before, is doing this through his podcast. Adam Curry touches on this even in Joe Rogan's in interviews with Joe Rogan, and so Adam Curry is a radio host, a podcaster, the Podfather. Paul Vanderklay is doing this. It is dialogue in mass, and part of the reason is that these conversations linger. You know, you're not here with me right now. What I'm saying is going to linger sort of in the digital space, and you're going to give me feedback, whether you write a comment, whether you do a response video, whatever it might be. There is going to be a sense of dialogue. Now, is it the type of dialogue that Socrates would have advocated for? No, I think it is different, and we have to recognize that as we experiment with this tool. But Plato sort of becomes our guide here, and maybe even Jesus and the followers of Jesus who wrote about him, they can kind of become our guide here as we navigate a new tool, a new technology. So Charlie was experimenting with and even succeeding with dialogue in mass because he even said this in an interview. He said, you know, we always have the cameras rolling. And so the cameras are there in a way to sort of protect us. But they also do this other thing in that they leave the conversation online for other people to find it. I thought, gosh, that is so intuitive, right? So I actually want to point out something that Donald Trump Jr. said about Charlie Kirk on this issue. So listen to this.
And I remember we're going to go on stage, and the Michigan State Police pulled us aside. They were there not because we had them, but they were just monitoring all of it. And they basically pulled me and Charlie aside and said, "Hey guys, we can't stop you from going out there, but we can't guarantee your safety, and we think it's a bad idea. You should cancel." And Charlie and I both sort of simultaneously looked at us, and we're like, we'd rather take an ass kicking than give them that win and be silenced. And we went out there and we pushed back, and we had the haters and we had the protesters, and we went at them kindly with words. And you could see the entire dynamic of the room. It went from being, probably 60-40 leftist to like 90-10, 95-5 when people were like, wait a second, like, let these guys have a conversation, let them speak. And you could see the shift in the room. And Charlie did that day in and day out for 9 years till yesterday, when he was killed doing just that. And he changed so many minds. He got people to be unafraid to speak up and to speak out and to actually voice their opinion and to embrace common sense. It's truly a loss for our country.
And this would be a death blow to the sophists and the devils who live in darkness. This is the death blow, that the lights could go on for a whole group of people at one time, whether it's a video that goes viral or a college campus dialogue. And as I pointed out, many posts online have wondered why this happened, why this type of retaliation for a person who just engaged in good faith dialogue. Again, tyrants need the sophists. Tyrants need the deception of the masses to keep a group of people under control. It's really hard to control a group of people because we're made in the image of God. We seek the truth, we seek love, we seek justice, and so it would be hard. The risk is always that one person stands up and sort of says, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. And the tyrant can go around, this sort of image of the tyrant going around a field of poppies. He can lop off the head of any one poppy who grows too tall, whose voice gets too loud. And he can lop off one at a time, but he could not lop off all the poppies if they grew up all at once. And so dialogue at scale is very dangerous to this cult that lives in lies and deception. And so the people who are wondering why this would happen to Charlie, I think some of it is shock, and that's understandable. But it's also a lack of awareness that this fight to the death, this battle between light and darkness, has been going on for thousands of years. And Charlie's part of that legacy. Socrates, Jesus, Stephen, as we'll see, followers of Jesus who were martyred for their faith. It's all part of this. And so the tyrant cannot control masses who are doing dialogue. words are powerful, and tyrants cannot tolerate people who have the power of words. Again, one well-placed, articulate argument against their sophistry, against their illusion, and the mask falls off, the house of cards collapse, the lights go on, and the cockroaches must flee. And so Socrates, as we know, never wrote anything down. Jesus as well never wrote anything down. His disciple, the disciple of Socrates, Plato, understood the power of the tool that he had access to. He wrote the dialogues down so that they could linger. Now, Socrates would have said, no, we don't need to do this. We want people to hold the arguments in their mind. We want the argument to come and live inside people, and there is an argument for that. But Plato essentially sacrificed some of that and used the tool of the written language to essentially preserve the dialogues of Socrates and share the dialogues of Socrates with the masses. Not unlike how Charlie Kirk and others are using digital platforms today. And so Plato wrote down the dialogues. He actually writes Socrates as a character in a play. If you read the dialogues, there's drama there. There is a drama. So again, it's not just the theater, it's how they're using theater. Unlike the plays, the drama is found in the dialogos, the moving word, the word that you have to follow the argument, you have to follow the logos to understand the drama that you're in, that you're participating with, that you're ingesting. And was Charlie trying to do the same with dialogue, with digital media, and mass mobilization? So this is where, so that's Charlie in the realm of Socrates, in the realm of the philosopher, in the realm of the cosmic battle between philosophy and sophistry, philosophy and theater, Hollywood, if you will, to get you to buy into certain lies that they want to feed you. So that's him in that legacy. But I think he also has a legacy as a Christian and as a follower of Jesus. And Jesus was killed for his words. The followers of Jesus were killed for their words, because words come alive in the hearts of people. Truth comes alive in the hearts of people. Those who could not listen to Jesus, they lashed out in violence, ultimately putting Jesus on trial under the cover of darkness. They put him on trial. He, similar to Socrates, he essentially gives his life. Now, Jesus, unlike Socrates, Jesus gives his life for humanity. Socrates sort of gave his life for the love of wisdom, for the love of the dialogos. Jesus takes it one step further because he's God incarnate. Again, is Dionysus a mockery of that, or is it a foretaste of what God would ultimately do by planting the seed of the gospel in the Hellenistic world? You can actually look at a podcast that I did with Louis Marcos. He's written on this, the preparatio evangelica, the preparation of the gospel for the Hellenistic world through this. So again, ironically, I think God is using the tools of the enemy against the enemy. And I think that may be the case here today. But those who could not listen to Jesus lashed out in violence. Again, that is just the reaction. That's always been the reaction, because they cannot engage in the dialogue, because they are liars and they love darkness. And the dialogue is about the truth and the light. And they cannot tolerate that. Their only option is death and destruction. That is the sacrament of this religious cult of death. The sacrament is chaos, disorder, destruction, and ultimately death. They're participating in the ritualistic sacrament of their religion. This anti-religion, this false religion. You can read this about Stephen. Stephen gives this testimony. He just lays out the history for these people, and they lash out against him, and they kill him for his words. Now they rush at Stephen with one mind. This is, we can just go there because we're in Logos, aren't we? They cried out with a loud voice and covered their ears and rushed at him with one impulse. One impulse. They acted as a mob. Notice that. Again, the mob. Again, and I've pointed this out before, but this is Babel. This is the Tower of Babel. This cult has its origins in the religion of Cain, if you will. The sons of God, rebellious. They take daughters of men. They create these men of renown. Babel. When you get to Babel in Genesis 11. It's sort of essentially the same group, and what you see there is not just that they use the same language. That is true. They use the same language, but they use the same words. So that's the mob. That's the mob mentality that you see today. All the news anchors are all saying the same script. I mean, they just say, if you do not use these words, then you are clearly not part of our religious cult, and you must be either silenced or eliminated if we can't silence you. They rushed with the same words, and when it comes to Stephen, they basically have one mind, one impulse. And that is the danger, that's the dangerous side of this digital media, is that it creates this sort of mass formation, this hive mind, this Borg mind. Now, I think ultimately people will find ways to use this tool to find truth, and so I think the hive mind is maybe better than the Borg mind, because the hive is working together. There is unity in diversity, and that's ultimately the promise of Christ's kingdom. That is ultimately the promise of Christ's kingdom, is that your individuality is not lost by becoming part of the body of Christ, by becoming part of the family of Christ. And again, it's this antithesis. The community, the church, the congregation is a unified whole made up of parts and individuals, just like the body analogy. But the anti-church, this cult of one mind, you have to give up your individuality. You have to give up who you are to be a part of the Borg, and to be a part of the blob, and to be a part of the mob. And then you just respond with this one impulse, right? This one impulse. And so let's go with some hope here. Let's again, thinking of the legacy of Charlie Kirk and others who have gone before him, not just the legacy of the philosopher, but the legacy of the Christian person standing in a dark world, representing the truth and light. John's gospel actually opens with the witness of John the Baptist. There came a man whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. There was the true light, which is coming into the world, which enlightens every man. He was in the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came into his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believed in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, but of God. We can go to John 12. And you'll read this. Beginning in verse 23, and Jesus answered, saying, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And what does he mean? He means his death. His death and his glory are mixed here. Later, you'll hear him talk to the followers on the way to Emmaus. Was it not necessary that the Christ would suffer these things and enter into his glory? Suffering precedes glory. Death precedes glory. But you enter into the glory. The Son of Man should be glorified. Truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. If anyone serves me, he must follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. And I think that is the legacy. That is the legacy of Christ followers. That is the legacy. That is the hope. That is the beautiful hope of those who follow Christ. You will never die. And paradoxically, when you die, it will be like a seed planted in the earth that bears fruit to eternal life for those who witnessed Jesus in you. That's what they witness. And so with that, I hope, again, that this is helpful, not only to answer the question of why, but maybe who, and to help us also, we who are here today listening to this, help us to understand where we are in history. What is going on today? And if you don't know Jesus, if you're here near the end of this video and you don't know Jesus, I mean, that is your invitation to not waste your life, to not waste your suffering, but to enter into his glory. Not the false glory, the facade, the mask, the theater, but the true drama, the true story that's actually happening. You not only can participate with it, like God has created you for a purpose in his master plan or story. And that purpose is to worship God and enjoy him forever, to reflect his true glory, full of grace and truth. I mean, there's just so much there. And again, that's why podcasts exist. Yeah, I can't say everything in one podcast. I'll make another one. I'll just pick up the thread again in another one. And I hope to see you there.